Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
We need to laugh when we feel a sense of loss or a sense of sadness or a sense of a coping mechanism that's required. I think that's where humour is much more powerful.
You know, with my nan's funeral, if you find yourself in the car driving in the opposite direction to the hearse, then you're probably going the wrong way, and but we ended up laughing about that afterwards as well.
It's not just that it's funny, it's that, oh right, this is what people go through, this is not just what I'm going through, this is the general human experience.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. For those who were listening last week, mentioned, got a bit of the old COVID in the house. Just blowing its way through now. Don't worry, kids have been back in school this week or last week, depending on when you're listening to this. So fingers crossed we've seen our way through that particular crisis, but a little bit hairy for a time. Just before we crack on with this week's conversation, just wanted to mention a couple of things in terms of some general housekeeping for the programme. So a couple of weeks ago, I think I mentioned we had some nominations in the Commercial Radio News Awards for the work we do here at Mental Health Monday. So we were up in two categories for Best Campaign, which was our Iron Men campaign on World Suicide Prevention Day, and it was also nominated in the Best News Story and Coverage for World Suicide Prevention Day for the Iron Man campaign. I also had a nomination in our Best Interview category for an interview I did with someone who had gone through conversion therapy as part of a project I was working on for the Hits Radio and Hits Radio Pride team. So 3 nominations, which was great, heading down to London with those 3 nominations, sort of hoping that you might maybe get one or get a runners-up or whatever, bit of a certificate. Anyway, I won all 3. all 3. All 3 awards, which has been, really quite something. So the Iron Men were championed as the best campaign. The Iron Men were also championed for the best coverage as well. So if you want to listen back to previous editions of Mental Health Monday, where you can find out the latest about what the Iron Men project was all about, what we did with it, there's video content that sits alongside it as well. Just scroll on back to World Suicide Prevention Day last year, end of August, start of September 2021. Thank you to everybody who took part in that. It was really, really huge. Thank you as well to those people who spoke to us about the conversion therapy story as well, and to my colleagues at Bauer Media who were able to work with me on that particular project and also get some cracking interviews that the judges wanted to recognise and did recognise at the Commercial Radio News Awards. So it's been a really great day. 3 trophies to come home, and really quite something. Now, let's crack on with this week's conversation. Let's get back down to business here on Mental Health Monday. We've got Siobhan Roxburgh and Sam Avery on the show. You might know Sam, he's a comedian, and you may have seen him on social media. You may even have seen him on stage. Now, the pair of them work with the Comedy Trust. Now, the Comedy Trust do some fantastic work using comedy as a tool to connect with communities. And they've got a new project which is up and running, and it's called Laughter After Loss. Now, this is for people who have experienced a loss of some kind to sign up. And actually, it seems quite counterintuitive, this, but to sign up to take part in a comedy course. Now, we'll hear this week about how that's going to work and about where those two sort of things that maybe don't quite feel like they fit together can actually be really beneficial. But laughter and loss are the topics of the conversation. Laughter After Loss is the name of the new project. A really great and exciting idea, this one. TheComedyTrust.com has got information about this from the team at The Comedy Trust. That's TheComedyTrust.com. You can sign up to Laughter After Loss and also get involved because they're actually even going to have a showcase of talent coming up at the Liverpool Comedy Festival as well, which is a real opportunity. But if you're thinking, why would people want to laugh after a loss? I think this conversation absolutely makes sense. We'll hear from Sam in just a few moments' time. First up, Siobhan explains exactly what Laughter After Loss is all about.
So, Laughter After Loss, it does sound strange, but it immediately appealed to me because I think of laughter as being a fantastic way to try and deal with mental health issues. Because I don't mind saying that I'm a bit of a survivor of that myself a little bit, and actually working with the Comedy Trust, doing some of the work that I've done previously, being involved in comedy. I was part of an improv group as well. That has been really useful to me. But it's also kind of backed up by a bit of the science that we've been looking at as well. So there's particularly a professor at Columbia University who specifically looks at how laughter can help with dealing with bereavement and loss. He's done a lot of research into it as well. And he's found that people who do use laughter when they talk about people that they've lost, they do better at maintaining their support networks. They have better mental health outcomes sort of 2 years on in terms of their recovery. And when you think about it, we're very used to the idea that the brain is a little creature of habit, and if we want to learn how to do algebra or play an instrument or do a sport or that kind of thing, we have to practice regularly. Unfortunately, the brain can respond like that to low mood and unhelpful intrusive thoughts. So although we perfectly accept those as being natural responses to grief, what the Comedy Trust is there to do is to provide a little bit of a respite from that. So a little bit of distraction, a little way of sort of teaching you how to laugh almost at some of the things that when life gets you down. I do it all the time. So like I quite often, when I'm talking about things that have gone wrong in my day, so I look after a couple of disabled children that are mine, so nobody else is going to do it for me. I talk about these things and laugh at them as I'm talking to people about them, because that's the habit that I've got into. And instead of kind of driving people away and making it awkward, they actually kind of just go, oh, you're still laughing at it. Let's go for a drink sometime, rather than, oh, I don't know what to do with this. So it does help people to maintain their support networks. Everybody is going to be sympathetic to someone who's been through a loss, but they might not know how to deal with that if it's very raw and very in front of them. So if you can learn to deal with it through some of the positive ways of speaking, through humor, through relating to others, peer support, that's essentially what we're doing, facilitated peer support, then you can allow people to have those conversations and keep them healthy with the people in their lives.
There's something in that sort of mindset, isn't there, Siobhan, where to laugh at something, it often, particularly when it's sad, it requires you to place yourself in a slightly different position and look at it from a slightly different angle. I think maybe sometimes if you're going through a difficult period, to offer yourself, or have the skill set to offer yourself an extra perception on something, seems like a really decent tool to have. And it just so happens that it's also a tool that allows you to find a situation funny. So it seems like a good skill that we should all maybe develop.
Yeah, and it's fantastic to see how some of the practitioners do that with some of the people that we work with. So if we're talking to somebody, and there was somebody who was talking about one of the workshops, without giving too much away, about how she with her dad on his deathbed, and suddenly all these little pockets of money that he started wanting to hand over to the daughter were coming from different places. And she was sort of, the practitioner was saying, oh, was your dad involved in a secret life of crime, or, you know, embezzling money left, right and centre? And we just all started laughing at this idea that this chap, who I'm sure wasn't involved in anything like that at all, was actually this crime boss with these like secret little accounts around the, you know, in Panama and places like that. So it really got this person laughing at what had actually been quite a sad time in their life. And sometimes when you listen to people who have these little catalogues of things that go wrong at the same time, it's like somebody's written them into a bad sitcom, and kind of the only way to sort of get onto that and turn it around is just to sort of list them out, almost as if like, and somebody's going, I wouldn't believe that. If somebody wrote that into a sitcom, that wouldn't be true. But these things do happen to people, unfortunately. So we, with our practitioners, they sort of help frame these things in a more positive light. We sort of help focus. So one of the people who comes to our group is a funeral celebrant, and he goes into people's homes when somebody has just died and talks to them about the person that we're celebrating. I love that term, because it is what we really want to do. We want people to celebrate us and celebrate the people who've meant something to us. And so he will bring out those funny stories from the families and fill the service with what we loved about the way that someone lived, rather than the way that they died. And because that is what is the most important thing about all of us. So we sort of also help people talk about the experience that we've had that have given meaning to our lives with that person before they've died.
You know, it's interesting, that, Siobhan, because I think if you said to someone, how should you speak about someone who's died, naturally people would say, presumably because we're pre-programmed to feel that way, you'd speak very deferentially about them, solemnly. But that's a notion as society that we've placed on death, hasn't it? Isn't it? Whereas actually you could say, well, actually, when someone goes, we remember their great moments. We laugh about the things that we used to laugh. Like that in and of itself is a celebration of life. And it's only that we've just decided that we do things in a slightly, the Queen Victoria wore black for the rest of her life sort of thing. It's only that we've decided that that is the standard, that this feels like a slightly stranger conversation. And actually, what you've just described is really normal. Someone you remember who you really liked, you remember in their life, and everyone's smiling and laughing. That seems much more sort of emotionally intelligent, doesn't it?
And it is quite peculiar to the way that it is peculiar to our particular culture. Other cultures do things in a more celebratory way, and have different kinds of rituals around remembering those funny things about people, and don't necessarily wear black. So, for example, a lot of cultures, it's normal to wear white when someone passes. And actually, it's something that happened to Queen Elizabeth II's mother when her husband passed, and she had to go on a tour of Europe. She wore white because she didn't want to be this big, dark, negative impact on the people that she was meeting when she went around. So she wore white. So a lot of the ways that we deal with death culturally are very normal to us, might not be the very, very healthy way to deal with them.
Absolutely. Let's bring Sam Avery onto the program. Sam, thank you for your time as well today. It's a really brilliant project, and Siobhan set it out really nicely in terms of how it will work and the benefits that it will bring. I don't know about you, Sam, but like some of the funniest conversations I've had with like family members have been at like funeral wakes, like once the funeral itself is done, much more relaxed time. And actually they can be sort of quite positive experiences. And a lot of that is the storytelling, is the laughing and the joking. And that can come during those sort of times.
Yeah, I mean, I love a wedding, but I also love a good funeral as well. Not because I like celebrating the fact that somebody's no longer with us, but it is that thing that you just talked about where people, I think, use humor much more in a situation where it's required. And I think that's when we need to laugh. We need to laugh when we feel a sense of loss or a sense of sadness or a sense of a coping mechanism that's required. I think that's where humor is much more powerful, which is why a lot of, especially when you watch stand-up comedy, a lot of comedy is not stories about happy occasions. It's often stories about when things didn't quite work out and go to plan, because that's when laughter is needed. It sort of bridges the gap between our expectations and the reality that we're living in. And it gives us like a way to kind of wrap our emotions into a digestible chunk that we can kind of digest and we can get over with, and we can reframe different situations. And it is an odd, peculiar part of the human race that funerals, like you say, once the service is out the way, the wake. I mean, I've had some of the best laughs ever at those things. Ultimately, they are very sad affairs if you take a step back, but the way people choose to remember often is very, very positive. And I think with this project, that for some people, it's not going to be the right approach, but for some people, it's going to be the perfect approach. And again, it's not a one size fits all. It's for those out there who feel that kind of they're at a point where they're ready to use humor and laugh about things. This is what this project's for, and these are the people that we're going to be helping.
Yeah, I think as well, it almost gives permission for people as well, doesn't it, to kind of say you don't have to look at it as you presume you're expected to look at a death. You can look at it from a different point of view. Actually, in terms of for people who are signing up to the course, and I'll give details for where people can do that, what guidance do you give them, Sam, about sort of the nature of sort of storytelling? Because of course, like if someone came up on stage, or if someone gave a speech at a wake and it was about the reason that the person died, you might go, oh, maybe this is a little bit too close. But actually, in terms of relatability, memories of that person, the nature of death in and of itself, things that are particular to the experience around that person's passing, I guess will be quite relatable to a lot of people in the room. And I guess as a comedian, you've got to find what's that button that you can press, which is going to bring the audience with you. And I guess that's why we've got sort of the experts on the course who can guide you through that to find where the true comedy lies.
Yeah, and I think with this project, it's very much a lighter touch. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the person coming along and talking about the person they've lost if they don't want to. it could just be laughing about something else. This is all about laughter after loss. So it's, you know, we could be laughing about the loss, but we could be laughing about anything. We could be laughing about something that happened to them on the way to the session. It could even be just them coming along and really passively just enjoying the session without being the front and center and life and soul of the whole thing. But humor's got this great way of sort of finding the right way for each individual to be able to use it in a way that's useful for them. And I think that's what we want to encourage with this. Because you're right, it can get too close to the knuckle, and some people enjoy that, some people don't. So it's kind of finding out what works for each individual and what people are ready to commit to.
Can I ask you about that? Because in terms of that, the individual who goes to use it as part of their own sort of maybe journey away from loss, or as you say, after loss, they might have their own experience, but I guess they're also aware that they're in a room full of other people who are sort of experiencing similar things. So I guess that sort of community sense is quite an important part of this. And I imagine there's a lot of conversations around the reason I found that particularly funny was because it reminded me of this. And I guess that's where a lot of the quote therapy lies within it, within things like this, that those connections open up from, I never thought of it like that, or I didn't think I could say that, or I never felt comfortable expressing it in that way, but you've just done that in a way which, you know, up on stage has allowed me to now maybe vocalize a particular set of thoughts that I had.
Yeah, definitely. I think for years we were just very committed to kind of working on the individual's experience when they work with us, whatever project we were doing. And I think over the last probably 10, 12 years, that community element that you mentioned is something that's really come up again and again from people saying, when we asked them, what did you get most from the program that we did with you? You haven't said, oh, I learned how to be more confident, or I learned how to do comedy, or I learned how humor can be used. It was, I felt part of something. I felt like connected to the other participants. And humor is the kind of oil that greases those wheels. You kind of relax people. You give people permission to be able to laugh at things. And that self-realization where you go, I'm not the only one going through X, Y, and Z. Someone else has just said out loud how I've been feeling for the last 3 months. Is so empowering and gives you that really strong connection with the other people that you're in. And that's something that we actively try to cultivate now, rather than it being a secondary kind of effect of what we're doing.
Absolutely. And if I had a little bell that would go off, or a siren every time someone used that phrase from a positive point of view when it comes to mental health, I feel like I'm part of something. It comes up thematically over and over again. Siobhan, I'll bring you back into the conversation at this point. Thematically, that comes up over and over again, that people in this world of, you know, get up in the morning, take the kids to school, go to work, put the kids to bed, get up the next morning, do the whole thing all over again. This sense of, I feel like I'm part of something. And I mentioned the word community as well before, and I used it deliberately because it's very much part of that. People suddenly feel like there is a world around them, and when they respond to it, it responds back to them. And when we talk about isolation and we talk about problems that people have around feeling like they're not connected to people, or they feel like they're lonely, Sam's described perfectly what we can also offer, which is actually people in a room where if someone talks, people respond. And there's a sense that you're all moving towards, you know, something together. And you touched on, you know, your own mental health journey as well, Siobhan. I just wondered maybe at what point that came in for you, that sense that you felt like you were part of something, or felt you wanted to be part of something bigger, if you like.
I think definitely for me, one of the happiest times I've had in my life was being part of Impropriety, which was an improv group that was working in Liverpool a few years ago with Rosie, who's one of the practitioners who works with the Comedy Trust at the helm of it. And it's that little feeling of community that I'm getting by going along to the regular drop-in groups at the moment. And although we've all been through a loss of a kind, because that is actually something that we all have to go through. You know, you can't go through the human experience without going through a loss at some point. But we're actually, apart from that, quite a diverse little group at the moment at the weekly drop-ins. And the practitioners do games to sort of get us to know each other. So we had a game a few weeks ago that we were playing that took up the whole session in the end. And it was one of those ones where you had to tell 2 true things about yourself and one thing that's the lie, and everybody else in the room has to work out which the lie is. Because people are trying to find things that will surprise other people when they learn that they're true. to kind of make the game harder, you end up finding out some really interesting things about other people. And we've got one practitioner who came away saying, well, it just goes to show you should never judge a book by its cover. And because we are we're endlessly fascinating to each other in terms of the fact that we are quite so diverse. And we've got widows who are younger, we've got people who've lost their parents during COVID, we've got people who've lost their partners during COVID, all different ages. And again, we've done some workshops within the NHS, and which is a huge organisation, and brought those. What a privilege, by the way, to be able to provide some support for people who've worked so hard for our community over the past few years. But even within that organisation, there's a huge amount of diversity, and you're sort of bringing people together with maybe one thing in common, just to become really close and engaged with people who lead a different and interesting path to them. So we are definitely seeing that those friendships form, which is really nice, because part of the thing about loss is that you may have lost the person that was your partner in crime that you used to go to the theatre with or the bingo with every week, or you might have lost your husband who you would socialise with other couples with, and now you feel a bit awkward doing that. So the social aspect is really important to people as well. Nobody needs to feel awkward about coming into the space, which is certainly something that other participants have mentioned. I've felt a bit withdrawn, because I feel like if people go, oh, where's your husband, or blah, 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 and I have to say they're dead, I've just like dropped a weight on their day. But you come along to our group and it's perfectly expected, and then we can almost be set to the side while we get to know each other a little bit. And so we started the drop-in groups at the beginning of June, and last week on the 29th of June was sort of the first time I've sort of found out how anybody's partner died. And it got to the end of the session and the practitioner was like, oh, I'm really sorry, I brought some things to do when we haven't done those activities. And I said, well, sometimes we just want to chat, and that's nice too, to have that opportunity, particularly now that we were doing some before I joined the project, we were doing some daytime stuff, and now we're doing it in the evening a little bit more, so that people can share their day. And from my friends who've been widowed, I know the evening time can be quite difficult, because even if you work with other people, you will go back after your daytime activities and maybe are in your house of an evening on your own. So it's quite nice for those people to be able to close the day with other people in a social setting as well. So that's a lovely thing to be part of, that people are really enjoying. I think we're small at the moment, but we're really friendly, so we're open to anybody joining us.
Absolutely. Well, let's point people in the direction of the website, www.thecomedytrust.com. You can click on the link there to Laughter After Loss, and it's actually building up this to a really special occasion. We're coming up on the 10th of November as part of the Liverpool Comedy Festival with a live show featuring some of the people who are taking part. But this is not to say that everyone who signs up is going to have to find themselves up on a stage if they don't want to. It actually, just being part of those sessions can be absolutely huge. Sam, can I ask you about the sort of, in terms of emotionally dealing with situations? We've had conversations about this from a parenting point of view, and a lot of the work you do now up on stage is telling stories about becoming a parent. I think sort of comedians have done sort of aspects of this for a long while, but you've sort of really sort of captured that market, if you like, of when things go wrong as a parent and you think, oh, I'm the worst parent in the world. My kids are a disaster because I'm a disaster. Emotionally, if you just do that on your own, you can understand why you might put yourself in a very negative position. But I know that that's something that you've done, and other people in different circumstances have done it as well, where you sort of own your shame a little bit, and you put it out there a little bit more to kind of go, actually, this is going to make a really good bit on stage. Instantly, you can then see that circumstance that you find yourself in, you offer yourself a wider perspective of it, and you utilize it to sort of paint a slightly different picture on stage. And I think that's a really useful sort of emotional crutch that you can use yourself. But also it cuts through some of the nonsense and the stigma that people have around perceptions about what they're supposed to be, or how they're supposed to be seen, or how they're supposed to respond. And there's a strong mental health vibe throughout that conversation, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's dead easy for me to sort of talk about my coping strategies because I've done stand up for so long now. I just, whenever something in any way negative happens to me, I instantly think, well, this will probably be funny in some way at some point. So, and then you take that conversation further and you think, well, when I make it funny, normally what happens is for it to be funny, it means that there's a recognition from an audience that they do that as well. So therefore, it's not just that it's funny, it's that, oh, right, this is what people go through. This is not just what I'm going through. This is the general human experience. Now, when I say those things on stage, which I know not everyone gets to do, but when I say it on stage and people laugh, then people say to me, oh, thanks for saying that out loud. I thought I was the only one. My response is always, well, thanks for laughing at it, because I thought I was the only one. And obviously, there are things I'll say and people might not laugh because maybe I've not said it correctly. I need to change the way I build up to that. But it's a two-way street. It's not just the audience telling me that they find, they're glad someone else is saying it. I'm really glad that other people are responding to it. From a non-comedian point of view, that doesn't have to be getting up on stage. That just has to be telling a friend, telling a colleague, talking about something to someone. And it doesn't have to be this hilarious anecdote, but just saying out loud what you're going through, especially in a supportive and safe group like we're cultivating here, is so powerful when you get other people go, yeah, that's me as well. And then you go, oh, right, I spent 2 years thinking I was weird. And actually, the only thing weird is not saying it out loud because everyone else is feeling that. So it's super powerful and goes back to the cliche. And a lot of cliches have an element of truth in them. A problem shared is a problem halved. And as much as that might be on tea towels in your nan's house, it's true. So that's what we're doing in a slightly more, updated way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely huge. And actually, as you mentioned, it doesn't have to be up on stage. It can just be, that conversation. And I've done this where you're talking to 4 or 5 mates, and then you say something and there's little or no response. And then, an hour later, you get a little nudge and it's like that thing you were saying before, that I really related to that. Oh, that sounds like me. And I think that for me is where those sort of breakthrough moments are. Can I ask you in terms of, when people talk about loss, that there's the losing of somebody, but in terms of sort of the focus of the comedy within it, if you like, are there things that stand out to you about maybe aspects that people decide to focus on? About, is it maybe that the partner's not around anymore, that the bad habits they used to have, they're not there either, but they kind of miss them or not? Or like, is there a particular sort of rich seam that people really tap into that maybe surprised you about there being sort of really strong sort of comedy vibes in there?
One of the things that came up and has come up again and again is, again, that perception of what's going to happen versus the reality. That's where a lot of comedy lives, whether it's scripted comedy, real life comedy, or whether it's sitcoms even. Reality and perception are often completely different. So one of the things that comes up a lot on this program is the 5 stages of grief. They're supposed to come in this certain order, and they're going to linger for a certain amount of time, and then the next one's going to be in the queue behind them, and then they'll turn up. And that's not the case for most people. It's just this ramshackle soup of emotions whirling around their head, and there's kind of the jump in the queue, they're pushing each other out the way, and there's just all these different emotions are coming. And it's dealing with all of that and knowing that one day you might have 5 different emotions in that same day, and different days are going to be different. You're going to have good days and bad days, and actually laughing about that. And that's been really powerful for people to acknowledge that, oh, right, is everyone else the same? I thought it was just me, because of all the things I've read says, first you're going to feel this, then you're going to feel that. And the reality is not that.
Siobhan, I don't want to give away any of the sort of the stories that people might be telling on stage, but I'll ask you the same question, if that's okay, because I think it'll give people a sense of the sorts of things that they might be able to talk about and share as part of these conversations.
Some people share some of the little jokes that they had with the person before, that their private in jokes that they had with the person before they passed, when the person, found a way to laugh at their own suffering. That's really touching, and it's really inspiring, actually, to find, that I think not only to us to listen to it, but when people realize that, that person was finding a way to laugh at their own suffering or the ridiculousness of it before they passed. And it just kind of reminds the person who is relating it that person has wanted them to go on and live their life with humor and laughter in it after they've passed, because it sort of dispenses with some of that guilt that some people might feel about, you know, taking up comedy because my partner died. That's not right. But actually, you know, if you've shared laughs with that person before they've passed, they don't want that to stop when they've passed as well. And then it's just finding people discovering themselves again, and you know, finding a new voice, a new way of framing things is just really, really lovely. You know, I personally use it all the time to talk about my kids, and you know, I can't get away from that, because it just my life does sound like a sitcom a lot of the time when I describe it to people, and it is the only way. It's like Sam says, and you know, Sam's doing a form of extreme parenting by raising twins, and I'm doing another form by raising children with special needs. But it's not laughing at special needs, it's just laughing at life, really. And that's what people are learning to do with us, is just find the funny in life. It can come from anywhere. It, you know, from talking even about funny things that happen to the funeral, like, you know, with my nan's funeral, if you find yourself in the car driving in the opposite direction to the hearse, then you're probably going the wrong way, and but we ended up laughing about that afterwards as well. You know, it can come from anywhere, really. It's just life.
Absolutely. I know a friend of mine became a dad to twins, similar time to Sam's, actually. And one of the midwife at the time said to him, you do know that of all people who are married when they have twins, only like 23% of them are still together after 10 years or something like that. Like this was part of the pep talk going into parenting. And I thought, well, if you didn't laugh at that, like, the other response to that is stand up and walk out of the room and, you know, Reggie Perry into the seat. Like, there's no, like, what else are you supposed to do other than laugh in a situation like that? We're not here to talk about your married life or anything like that, though. But that was an example of one of those things where you think, well, actually, their laughter would probably be the most appropriate response, because otherwise you'd find yourself sort of entering sort of more negative territory. Just finally, Sean, in terms of the people who've gone on courses like this, and the Comedy Trust has done brilliant work in this field for a number of years now. When people catch up with you a year down the line, 5 years down the line, even if they're not stayed in contact, what sort of things do they say to you about what they've done since, the conversations they've had, how they found it beneficial in the long run to get involved in something like this?
Well, I am actually a graduate of one of Sam's stand-up comedy courses. That was my first contact with the Comedy Trust years ago, when my friend asked me to give a speech at her wedding, because she didn't have a father and I was her maid of honor, so I did that, and so it got me through that, and then I find it's quite useful for all kinds of confidence and speaking and that kind of thing. But we have participants who have been through a loss since having done a course with the Comedy Trust and have come back to that again. And I'm thinking of one of them particularly who his brother has passed more recently, and said that it made the passing and the atmosphere in the room, it kind of lifted it for everybody and turned it into an experience where that person could look back and go, you know, my brother had a good death, that the people surrounding him were focusing on all the right things and remembering him with humor, and a lovely atmosphere in the room with him at the end. That's really important. That's a lovely thing to hear back from somebody. And so, you know, we all get touched by loss, and for most of us, you know, it's not going to be the last time. You know, we will know other people as we get older who will pass as well. So these skills are life skills, really, to help you through all of it in the future. It can change, it just, you know, it changes your way of thinking, really.
And actually, Sam, that's a great point to end on, that, you know, these are life skills. This is a skill set that we can learn. If you have the skills, you're much more sort of adaptable in those situations. Your emotional intelligence levels sort of increase as well, and it sets you, you know, in a slightly better place for dare I say, the inevitability of what will come in the future. Sorry, this is a really sort of quite depressing. You throw a joke if you want into this answer, Sam. But actually, as a skill set to have, this is a really strong one. That's the way I'll be positive about it.
It's all about building resilience, isn't it? That's what we always talk about. But you can't affect what the world throws at you, but you can affect your response. And what we're doing with humour is we're building this muscle up to be able to deal with the bumps in the road that inevitably come as part of life.
Absolutely. There we go. You summarise that much better than I. Thecomedytrust.com, click on Laughter After Loss. Get involved in this one as well. There's a mailing list you can sign up to as well to find out more information about the project and the other projects of the Comedy Trust as well. Thecomedytrust.com. Check that out. And the big show on the 10th of November featuring some of the people taking part in this very course. So Sam Avery, Siobhan Roxburgh, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us on the programme.
Thanks for having us, Mick.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.